serving the internet.
Oh yeah, this is going to be a special edition of the Ad Nerds podcast where I reach into the digital mailbag, the comments, and the questions that I've been getting since launching the podcast, and I'm going to answer them today. It's coming up.
Ad Nerds Podcast. Ad Nerds Podcast. Ad Nerds.
The Ad Nerds podcast delivers ad industry news every weekday. We are the go-to source for people who spend money on advertising. We cover big brands, small businesses, and the latest marketing trends. It's me, Spanky Moskowitz, the show host, and a 40-year, well, nearly 40-year veteran. I'm a year closer after my birthday, which was Thursday. 40-year veteran of the advertising industry, having worked with Budweiser, M&M's, Frito-Lay, MLB, the NFL, and NBA. I have personally created and developed over 100,000 ads in my career and have generated hundreds of billions of dollars in client revenue. If you're in or interested in the world of advertising and want to stay up to date with the latest news, the Ad Nerds podcast is the perfect place to start.
Ad Nerds Podcast.
As I said right at the start of the show, this is a different episode. This is a special edition of the Ad Nerds podcast, and I'm not going to really dive into advertising industry news today. No. On this special edition, I'm going to answer the number one question that I've been getting since I launched the podcast. The question is, why, Spanky, does your podcast sound so different? And so let me start with a couple of things, a quick background. I feel like I need some background music. Should I put on some background music? Okay. Here's some background music. This is our background advertising. No, it's not going to work. Okay. Background music's gone. So you have to understand that I came up in the radio industry. So I spent years, decades in the broadcast media side of the world. And so for me, producing a show is in my DNA. It's very part of who I am. And so when I decided to set out and produce the Ad Nerds podcast, I wanted to make sure that it sounded like a radio program and not the typical podcast that has all of the technical issues, the weird sounding noises that go on with podcasts. I want it to be a little more polished, a little more feel like a radio program. So I decided to put things together in a way that make it sound like a radio program. So first and foremost, you may have noticed I have these jingles.
Ad Nerds Podcast.
And you'll hear them throughout the podcast.
Ad Nerds Podcast. Ad Nerds Podcast.
Because I came up in the radio industry, I decided to reach out to a big production company that spends all of their time making jingles for the broadcast industry. And because I've had such a long career and history in that space, I was able to hire them to produce the jingles for the podcast. So that's the first thing. That's a production element, which adds a little bit of differentiation from a lot of the podcasts that are out there. So if you're looking to start a podcast, you might want to reach out to a company that can do jingles for you because it makes the podcast sound different. But the biggest thing, the one thing that makes it really different is the microphone and microphone processing chain. And so we're going to get a little bit nerdy on the technical stuff here because I owe a lot of friends in the broadcast industry a lot of credit for teaching me the nuances of processing over the years. Now, my voice does sound like this, okay? This is me, but this is me run through a processor. And the processor I use, the mic preamp that I use for this podcast, which is why it sounds so different, is a DBX 286S. S as in Sam. And I can turn off the processor so you can hear the difference, but this is me without the mic processor. It's still the same me, but when I turn on the mic processor, this is a broadcast quality mic processor. And what it does is it eliminates the room noise. It makes it sound all rich and creamy. Oh, I actually said my voice sounds rich and creamy. No, what it does is you're hearing it literally eliminate the sound in the room. And so what makes a podcast sound like a podcast is most podcasts do not have a mic preamp like the DBX 286S. I use a pretty standard Mackie Pro FX 12 V3 board. For those of you who do podcasts, you might be familiar with Mackie boards. They're pretty easy to use. I have a bigger 12 channel. And then I use a Stream Deck. And the Stream Deck is what fires off all of these sounds while I'm doing the show.
Ad Nerds Podcast.
Finally, for the camera side of things, for those of you that watch the podcast on YouTube, here, I'm going to look at you this time. I never look at you directly. But for those of you who watch it, I am using Sony ZV-1 cameras. I have two of them. I only use one for the podcast, the one that's to my right. And those cameras film in 4K. And the process is pretty easy then because I record using Ecamm Live. Stream Deck fires my sounds. The Sony ZV-1s capture it in 4K. I export the audio and we are done. It's like magic. So for those of you who've been asking about why my podcast sounds so different, and I've literally gotten like 20 or 30 different messages, emails, questions, and they all have the same theme. So I figured I would do this special show this weekend to make sure that those of you who are interested in podcasting kind of have an understanding. And feel free to message me anytime, okay, at my business email. That's ken@AdZombies.com. You can use AdZombies. Yes, the podcast is there, Ad Nerds. My business is AdZombies. Okay, so feel free to message me. You can email me anytime, ken@AdZombies.com, or you can use Spanky@AdZombies.com. I'm happy to help you and answer those questions if you have further questions at all. So that does it for this special edition of the Ad Nerds podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you hearing me out. It is Spanky. I am out.